Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and in today's episode, we will focus on the state of public infrastructure in the United States of America. Now, every 4 years, the American Society of Civil Engineers releases what's been called the nation's most important report you've probably never heard of, the report card for America's infrastructure. And using a simple A to F grading scale, it assesses the state of everything from roads, bridges and railways to water systems, schools, broadband and energy grids. And this year's report card gives the US infrastructure an overall grade of C, highlighting a mix of hard-won progress and mounting risk. So what does that actually mean on the ground? Well, to help us break it all down, I'm joined by Tom Smith, Executive Director of the American Society of Civil Engineers and one of the country's most respected voices on infrastructure strategy, resilience and investment. Tom will, I'm sure, give us great insight into why this year's report card matters, what it reveals about how we build and maintain critical systems, and what it'll take to move from crisis response to long-term planning. And I hope in particular Tom's going to explain what it means for everyday Americans. So let's get into it. Tom, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Greetings. Thanks for having me, Anthony. It's great to see you again after being together in New York City last month.
Yes, no, I enjoyed that session at the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Bentley Systems event in New York. It certainly opened my eyes as to what's going on with the American infrastructure world. And as I said, the 2025 report card gives US infrastructure an overall grade of C. And I suppose that's a slight improvement from past years, but it's still far from what's needed to support a competitive, climate-resilient, equitable economy. I mean, I think some sectors are showing real gains, but others, like rail flood defences and stormwater management, perhaps slipping backwards. I mean, what key actions would you say led to the improvements and the deteriorations, and why should the public care about a C?
Absolutely. Well, as you referenced, I mean, this is incremental improvement. We're at a C, so that's great because we've seen some improvement. But it's definitely not something you'd write home about. You wouldn't be proud if your son at university is bringing home those grades. If you look all the way down the list of the grades that comprise that C, over half of them are in the D range. So while it is improvement, we have shown some, we've had some additional investment, particularly at the federal level. And that permeates throughout the states and localities. And so we've seen improvement incrementally. We've shown that we can do it. If we commit to it going forward, I'm confident that we can do that going forward. But this is something that's critically important to every American. And honestly, it's one of those issues that's important to every citizen on the planet. Yeah. We need our infrastructure for our quality of life and indeed for life itself.
I think it is a great means to really kind of give a snapshot of where we are. And it's certainly a very visual representation of what's happening. And I suppose despite the progress you say, 9 infrastructure categories are still in the D range, which, they ain't great. I mean, what concerns you most, and why hasn't progress reached them yet?
Well, on a positive, this is the first report card we've issued where we don't have any category that's a grade of D minus. So that's actually an improvement. Right. So, while we have half the grades in the D range, no one is at the D minus. And so, again, not something to be proud of, but incremental improvement. Those D grades are the results of decades of underinvestment and deferred maintenance. We've been doing this report card since 1998, and you may know the genesis of this report card goes back to 1988 under the Reagan administration. There was the Fragile Foundations report, right, a congressionally chartered council that prepared that report, and they were recommending literally up to a doubling of infrastructure investment, and that really concerns at that time about deferred maintenance. And here, since that time, we really haven't had a significant level of infrastructure investment. Our tax on gas and petroleum hasn't increased since 1993. It's not indexed for inflation, and so we have just not invested. And so we have this lot of infrastructure that's been designed, built by a prior generation, oftentimes 50, 7,500 years ago, and we're paying the price for that now. And so, it took a long time to get to the state that we're in, and it's going to take a fair amount of time to really improve. And it's going to take incremental improvement. Again, we saw that in the 2021 report card, where we went from a D plus to a C minus, and then we see that in the 2025 report card when we went from a C minus to a C.
Yeah, you mentioned 1998, and I do remember when it first was launched, because when I was at New Civil Engineer magazine, we blatantly ripped it off. And I think the Institution of Civil Engineers has been running with it for a few years now, but not in quite the same, with as much power as you have. I mean, the report card, I say it uses a school grading system. I mean, why do you think that format is so powerful in cutting through political noise and really engaging citizens and lawmakers alike?
Yeah, it's one of those things that everybody understands. You know how communication is. It's so difficult to communicate the complexities of our infrastructure, and so much of it out of sight and out of mind. And how do you really get people's attention? And of course, we're engineers. We have tons of data that backs up everything that we're doing, and we're poring over data. We've got over 50 people that are doing this to develop these report cards. And so when you when you really boil it all down into a report card that we've all been getting since we were in grade school, everybody understands it. And so when you say C, most people understand that's pretty much mediocre. It requires attention. And when we were at a D, that was even worse. That was poor and at risk. So we have certain elements of our infrastructure that are poor and at risk right now. And so again, 9 of those 18 categories are in the D range. So that means it needs significant attention. So the report card is a simple way to get the public's attention, to get policymakers' attention, and really to educate everybody on the importance and the status of our infrastructure.
Well, we always used to joke that the problem with it was, as that engineers, they even if it's perfect, they never give more than 8 out of 10 anyway, because that's the way engineers think. It's discussed.
Well, I suppose engineers do work with a factor of safety oftentimes. We because the stakes are so high. It's public health, safety, and welfare, and the number of lives that are at stake. There are so many, and so we really do obviously have to take very seriously our ethical responsibilities, and we take this report card equally seriously, because we know that communicating these issues is a responsibility that we have as engineers for the public. Yeah,
and of course infrastructure changes, and this year you mentioned rail, you mentioned energy, you mentioned the roads and transit, but this year you've introduced broadband for as a grade for the first time, and it received a C+. Why now? Why do you talk about broadband, and how does it relate to this sort of the physical infrastructure conversation?
Yeah, I guess since COVID, we've even seen even more so how important broadband is, and we relied on it for education and for medical attention, and so reliable internet access is really becoming a necessity, and it's very hard without it to accomplish the normal tasks of life. So 5 years ago, when we were at the peak of the shutdown, this was an issue that employed folks when their offices were shut down, and our students were learning through using broadband, as well as doctors' visits. But we in the United States, we know 10% of households that is estimated still do not have broadband subscription. So we're talking about over 12 million people. So that's a very significant issue. It took us a while to get a grade here, because in the beginning we didn't have enough data. Yeah. But this time we felt like we did have enough to give it a grade, and you saw that's a C+ at this time.
Yeah. One of the things the report card perhaps doesn't really take account for is this idea of a system of systems nature of infrastructure. When we were in the US, I interviewed the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland about the Baltimore bridge collapse, and the point that she highlighted there is that failure in a bridge structure had a massive impact on the whole logistics of the port and the operation of the transport systems and the whole functioning of the community. I mean, how does one sector's weakness and the rippling nature of failure as it impacts other sectors, how is that taken account in the report card?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I loved your interview with Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller. And by the way, she's a civil engineer, as you know from your interview, and she's very passionate about civil engineering. So it's great to have someone in that leadership role who really understood the importance of our infrastructure. And of course, now they're working on the replacement for the Key Bridge, and that's a huge project, and I think it's going to be a wonderful bridge once they're done. But that was a great example of the importance of the systems thinking with our infrastructure, because a lot of the infrastructure is just as strong as the weakest link in that chain. And we see that time and time again. So where you saw that bridge come down, look at the impact it had on the port, look at the impact it had on their navigation system for waterways because of the freight that's moved on rail as well, and looked at the impact that it had on our roads and bridges in the surrounding area, as you had all that traffic that had to be detoured. So it was a very substantial impact on the overall infrastructure system. We've seen that in other examples here in DC where you have a water line break and then the next thing you know, it shuts down the metro below. And what happens then? All the surface transportation is gridlocked because you no longer have your transportation transit system working. So, it's all connected. And the weakest link is always a very significant concern. So we spend a lot of time talking about systems thinking and training for engineers. And we're trying to connect all the different types of engineers. First off, the disciplines within civil engineering, geotechnical, structural, transportation, water, all those engineers need to be coordinating and talking with each other. That's one of the things we do at ASCE is train them and connect them.
Yeah, well, the advantage you've got there is that your organisation covers all the disciplines, and I suppose in the UK we're slightly more siloed in our approach there, and I presume that helps.
Yeah, well, silos are just, I think, part of life, and we certainly have them here. One of the things we're doing is in 2027, that will be ASCE's 175th birthday. So we're not as old as the Institution of Civil Engineers. When we were there when they helped to celebrate their 200th anniversary, it was a wonderful event. Yep. But we have our 175th anniversary coming up, and we're going to be consolidating our different technical conferences into one large conference, and we're going to. I think that's going to be our model going forward. So we really want to connect all these engineers and make sure they're communicating and collaborating.
Well, I'll keep my eye on that for sure. Now, Tom, behind all the, I suppose, the marketing and the easy to get your head around the letter system of the report, there's also some real-world numbers attached to it. And the report shows a $3.7 trillion investment gap over 10 years. So what are the real-world consequences for American families if that gap isn't closed?
Yeah, for years we've done economic studies also to show just what is the impact. What is the hidden tax that every citizen pays if you don't invest in infrastructure? I've always said, we really don't have a choice. I mean, you've got to have clean drinking water. We need transportation. We've got to protect ourselves from floods, and we have to have stormwater, dams and levees. I mean, all of these things, aviation, all of these things are necessary for our quality of life, for economic prosperity, global competitiveness. I mean, all of those things are dependent on this infrastructure. And so what happens when you don't invest, and what does it cost? So we've estimated when we did this in 2021, deficient infrastructure cost American families about $3,300 a year.
Yeah.
And that's, time you spend sitting in traffic or wear and tear on your car or added costs of goods and services because of inefficiencies in the system. Our latest study that we did last year, and again, we've had investment, shows that number's down to $2,700 per year. Now, that's thanks in part to investments in infrastructure, and we can get that down to $2,000 if we continue this funding under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we've made some progress, but again, we're still paying a significant tax.
Yeah, you mentioned legislation. I mean, the legislation such as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, certainly gave infrastructure a funding boost. But the reality is those laws expire soon, Tom. We're seeing a hugely different policy approach from the Trump administration, particularly in the area of energy, but across the board. I mean, what's your message to Congress as we approach 2026 then?
Well, we just had in March, we had over 250 engineers from around the country come in on Capitol Hill, and we go out and we talk to members of Congress and we let them know about the importance of continued sustained investment in our infrastructure. Again, we don't really have a choice. And we're seeing more and more of these extreme weather events, and we have got to be prepared for the future. We cannot just rely on the past. So we are spending a lot of time advocating, and many of our members are writing letters. Their constituents, they're writing letters to their representatives in Congress to let them know the importance of this investment. And we're also trying to show what happens when you do invest.
Right, yeah.
We've got lots of projects around the country, and we've been doing media roadshows all around the country with other organizations, American Public Works Association, American Council of Engineering Companies, where we highlight projects all over the country and show how they've had tremendous impact for people's lives. Instead of just highlighting civil engineering when there's a hurricane come through or an earthquake or a flood or a wildfire. And we see that in the news, certainly increasingly amounts. I mean, we're seeing more and more of these billion-dollar storms.
Yeah.
That we had 27 of them last year. So yes, we're trying to highlight these and make sure that the administration understands the importance of infrastructure. The current President Trump, was he was a builder, and so advocating the importance of continuing to build for this country. And I think that's a message that will really resonate. I think it's a red, white, and blue issue. It's on both sides of the aisle. So we're pushing hard on that to make sure that everybody understands.
Yeah.
And we've been writing letters also to different agency heads, also talking about the importance of research, the importance, we need data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, FEMA, Emergency Management Administration. We need NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. That data, and we just had a workshop with NIST last week. We have a workshop with NOAA coming up in a couple of weeks. We need the data to go into our standards and for our building codes. So we're trying to make sure that message is getting across to everybody loudly and clearly.
And I get that loud and clear, Tom. But the reality is, though, and you can point to all the storms that are happening, the reality is most people don't realise that the biggest infrastructure costs perhaps come from extreme weather. And you're operating in an environment where you have an administration which is really kind of denying the concept of climate change fundamentally. I mean, how do you explain the fact that resilience investments actually save money in the long term in such an environment?
Yeah, well, it's becoming, unfortunately, easier and easier to explain. I mean, just this week, San Antonio had flooding and a number of lives were lost. We had, of course, the wildfires in California. We're as we go into hurricane season, we'll be dealing with issues, and we have concerns about getting insurance coverage in different states. So we're seeing the impacts, and we're seeing the dollars that are needed to recover. And as I mentioned, if you look at the NOAA data, $27 billion events last year. So these are, hitting people's pocketbooks. And so we don't have a choice. We have got to be prepared for that going forward. So extreme weather events, it's hitting people on both sides of the aisle, and we have got to be prepared for that. And I think that's a message that we're trying to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient. And I think, again, that resonates on both sides of the aisle. And we've got studies that are very clear. When you invest $1 up front, it saves up to $13 on the back end when you're trying to recover from these things. And I can give you, many examples of hurricanes. Look at Harvey, or go back to Hurricane Katrina. Look at the Winter Storm Uri in Texas. We've got all of those, and you look at the dollars that it took to recover from those things, and what it would have cost in certain instances to try and harden the infrastructure to be prepared for it. Now, it's all, a lot of this is planning. It's emergency, alert systems, and its response. There's a lot of different elements to this, but certainly the infrastructure itself and having codes and standards that ensure resilient infrastructure that is robust and is prepared for future conditions, not just past conditions. That's what it's all about. When we talk about climate, we're talking about future conditions and where the puck is going and not where the puck was, 20 or 30 years ago. Yeah. And our data, our rainfall data, much of it needs to be updated so that we're looking forward and not backwards. So it's an easy message to get across when you can sit down with somebody and explain it. And it's one of those issues where you just don't have a choice. You've got to be prepared. Well,
Sir John Armitt, who used to chair the National Infrastructure Commission.
Yes, I remember him well.
Well, he used to constantly remind me that that politics and infrastructure are umbilically linked. That you can't separate the two, and you have to really approach it in that way. And of course, talking a bit about you, you're a lawyer by background, and you're based now in Reston, just outside Washington, which highlights the fact that you need to be there on the ground a lot of the times to make that case. But while practicing, you had a particular interest in sustainable development. How has that background really shaped, and you talk very passionately about it there, how has it shaped your approach to infrastructure policy and advocacy?
Yes, and by the way, it was a pleasure to work with Sir John Armitt. I got to know him some years back and have been over there with working with the Institution of Civil Engineers over the years, and it's just a first-rate organization. And I recall his work on the Olympics too.
That's right. Yeah.
And I know ICE has been equally passionate about sustainability.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Professor Jim Hall, the current president, that's the ethos of his whole presidency, yeah.
Yeah. And so our vision at ASCE is engineered and natural systems working in harmony for the benefit of humanity. So we spent a lot of time focusing on sustainability and doing things in a way that's going to look out for future generations and not just the current generation. So a couple of years ago, it took us years to get this across the finish line. We published a standard practice for sustainable infrastructure. It's called ASCE 73. It's been endorsed by the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, the Pan American Federation of Organizations, the Asian Civil Engineering Coordinating Council, and it is very focused on how do you make sure that we have sustainable projects. And it also is, and we look at, the life cycle of our infrastructure. And so I think we have to just have a longer term horizon. You probably know, Anthony, we did a film that we released last year called Cities of the Future.
Yeah. I remember.
And it's playing in IMAX theaters all around the world. I have to check it. Maybe it's in London. If it isn't, I'm sure it will be. It probably is there now. But when we started that project, we pulled together experts who were looking at what do we think the future is going to look like 50 years out, and then what are the scenarios we see evolving as a consequence. Like, what are the things the trends that are going to be impacting us, and how do we think the world's going to evolve as a consequence, and what a city's going to look like as a consequence? And then we pulled a virtual reality tool to build some of those cities, a mega city. And you've probably seen it. You put the VR goggles on, you immerse yourself in the city. Now you got the IMAX film and an educator's guide that goes with it. But the thing that we are considering is, we're doing all this investment in infrastructure. You look at our standards, ASC 73, and it's like, what's the life cycle of the infrastructure we're designing today? Well, for roads and highways and bridges, it's 100 years. And if you look at water and wastewater treatment plants, it's 100 years. That's the life cycle duration that we're using when we evaluate that infrastructure. And, dams and levees, 100 years. So if that's the case, we need to be at least looking at, everyone was thinking, well, we're looking at 50 years. Isn't that really great? You have to do that. That's the midway point for some of these things. And so we really have to consider future generations and not just our own. And that's what sustainability is really about.
Well, I bumped into the president of the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation recently. He had a hat that said, "Make Earth Great Again." And a slightly different spin on that. Anyway, you're based, let's not go down that path. You're based, as I say, in Reston, Virginia, just outside Washington. What do you get up to, Tom, when you're not thinking about U.S. infrastructure then? Are you out in the countryside? What do you do? Are you a city
what do I
person?
do in my spare time?
Yeah.
It seems like most of my spare time is spent on ASCE. We're meeting. We have student symposia that have been going on all around the country, and there's so many ASCE activities. But I basically like to be outside at any time. I got into civil engineering. One of the things reasons I wanted to study civil engineering is because I thought I would be working outside. And working with getting your hands dirty and working on things that really impact people that are tangible. I spent a lot of time on the Potomac River. I like to kayak there. We have a couple of kayaks, and we've got an 8-mile kayaking trek that we do very frequently. We drop cars at one end and the other. And so I like to hike a lot. I play almost all sports in my life. And so I like to do any kind of sports. And I've got 3 boys who are the same way.
Very good, very good. Well, talk about a bit more about the ASCE. And I have to say, when I was wandering around the US recently, I did notice quite a few of the ASCE puts plaques on different structures and gives people some information. Oh, that's a fantastic idea. There was one that's highlighted in Philadelphia, the I think it's the world's tallest freestanding stone structure they've got there in the town hall, etc. And I think that's really, really good. But it was founded in 1852, represents 160,000 engineers. How do you see the society's role evolving today in this era of climate risk, digital infrastructure, and rising public scrutiny, I suppose, as well?
Yes, and you're right. We do put those plaques all over the world, and one of those plaques is sitting in the Institution of Civil Engineers headquarters.
Oh, right.
Right, not just
actually,
up the street
I have seen it.
Parliament.
Yes, I've seen it. Yes.
Yeah. I was there when we placed that plaque on the 200th anniversary, and we've got them all over. And of course, when you were in New York, there's one on the Brooklyn Bridge, there's one on the Manhattan Bridge, there's one on it's quite an honor to have one of those historical designations. And obviously, so we're looking back and celebrating some of the things that civil engineers have done to protect the public health, safety, and welfare over the centuries. But we're also obviously looking forward, and how is ASCE going to change? I think we're becoming less siloed. We're really trying to connect our individual institutes. We're really focused on standards right now. As I referenced earlier, we have a centralized standards making operation that we've just initiated over the last couple of years that's really working with the different agencies. And again, that's why we're advocating for the support of these agencies, because these standards are really how we make law. They can be adopted into building codes. That's how we really can protect the public health, safety, and welfare and stop spending money on the back end by investing on the front end. And so, like anything, it requires, balanced committees with hundreds. And our ASC 7, the minimum design load standard, there's over 600 engineers that work on that standard, and non-engineers, all experts of all kinds that provide input on these types of standards. As you mentioned, you got to look at social issues, environmental issues, economic issues. Where we do finance symposia now to make sure that we're bringing the finance community together, because one of the key issues is always, how do you fund this stuff? And we need federal investment, state, local investment, and we need private investment.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at that. Extreme weather events you've mentioned. I think you've mentioned in the report that it costs $182 billion in damages in 2024 alone. Given that level of downside, what's stopping us from treating resilience as essential rather than optional when it comes to infrastructure planning?
Well, I think it's human nature, and the political system that we're in. It's more of a upfront cost and ribbon cutting, as opposed to maintenance is just not quite. It doesn't have the appeal that new infrastructure does, and maintenance is so much a part of the cost, which is why we're trying to make sure everybody understands what's your upfront cost. Look at the life cycle cost. You buy a car, you buy a house. If you try not maintaining either one of those, you're not going to get very far. And so a human body, you've got to maintain it. Otherwise, you're going to pay more of replacement costs on the back end. And so infrastructure is the same way, and trying to make sure everybody understands that. The problem we have is oftentimes your infrastructure's out of sight, out of mind. You don't see the water. It's all, a lot of the drinking water, storm water. And so, it's insight when you're sitting in traffic, but a lot of it, the rest is not. And when that changes, however, is when it disappears. If your energy systems go down at Heathrow, or your energy systems go out, as we saw in was it Portugal and Spain? And right now in DC, we got a boil water advisory for certain parts in Northwest DC because we had a power issue that caused some concern. These things, when it happens, all of a sudden you've got everybody's attention.
Yeah.
And it's first and foremost above everything else. And we're trying to make sure that it stays first and foremost when there's not a disaster.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the water issue in DC. And of course, that's a system problem because it starts with the power failure and it ends up with the water. What amazed me is a number someone quoted when I was in New York, is that there's 55,000 individual water authorities in the US. And with with that scale of individual organisations, it's no wonder it's hard to get those systems working. That presumably is a major challenge for the US.
It is. We've got states, counties, and then if you look at our water systems, so you got private and public sector. There is a level of complexity there. And we do have significant water loss. By and large, we have safe, reliable, clean drinking water, but we do have a fair amount of loss in that system. We've got water line breaks every 2 to 3 minutes in the United States, and so you got inefficiencies in the system. And we don't really price water at the level. We're willing to pay for Starbucks, our coffee and our Netflix and entertainment, but we balk at having to pay for our infrastructure. And so
it's the same story over here. Yeah, same story over here. You mentioned public-private partnerships. Are they likely to be better structured in the future to try to help this long-term resilience and public accountability?
Well, we just had Infrastructure Week a couple of weeks ago, and what is it? The GIIA, Global Infrastructure Investment Association, and there was the CEO from the UK was here and speaking, and we're really trying to learn from other countries. The UK, I think, has done a good job. Australia, Canada, we are we can do better. We certainly have some private investment projects that have been very successful, and we know we can do it. But I think we can do more of it. It's not the only answer to our infrastructure issues, but it is one of the tools in the toolbox. And we are advocating for significantly more private investment in our infrastructure. Ultimately, though, all of us who use infrastructure have to pay for it one way or the other, whether it's a user fee or a tax. I mean, we got to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, infrastructure, you say, it touches every American. It touches everyone in the UK from the moment you wake up in the morning till you go to bed. I mean, much of it, as you say, also is invisible until it breaks. So how does an organisation like ASE help bring the public into this conversation before the crisis hits?
Well, the report card has been an effective way to do it. IMAX films, we know that the public and kids, as we're looking at the pipeline of future engineers, they love watching videos. And what better way to watch a video than on an IMAX 3D screen? And so we have that is one of the ways that we're getting the message across about our infrastructure, how important it is. And even if you watch the film that we did back in 2017, I know that played in the UK, that was Dream Big. And it's emotional. You watch it, some people will shed a tear watching that. You don't usually expect to see that when it comes to infrastructure, but there are ways to do it, to get the message across. And we're constantly trying to find better ways to do it.
Yeah, well, going back again to the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Conference, we heard from the San Antonio mayor. He was talking about an initiative they had there to really improve and increase the engineering and the labour workforce. To try to engage with the community and actually use it as a way to actually upskill people, give them greater employment chances. What else do you think policymakers can do now to secure the talent that we're going to need in the 2030s and beyond to actually drive forward these infrastructure plans?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about workforce issues. In fact, I just came back from a 2-day education summit with department chairs for civil engineering all around the country and a lot of educators. And we're talking about our education system and how do we better attract engineers into future engineers, but also then educate and then retain those engineers once they get into the workforce. So we spent a lot of time up at Case Western in Cleveland over the last couple of days. We're in a consortium with a dozen other organizations, the lead organizations, American Council of Engineering Companies, ASE, and APWA, American Public Works Association. And we just sent a letter. We have a letter that's getting ready to go to the President of the United States talking about the importance of investing in our workforce. We have got to attract and retain this technology workforce of the future. And so, we spend most of everything we do at ASC is about workforce. It's about attracting, retaining, developing them throughout their careers.
Yeah. Well, I imagine that roads, railroads, levees, water systems, they certainly are things that you can build in America.
Oh, absolutely. You pretty much, they're pretty localized for most countries. I mean, those are things that, but we can share information. I will tell you, as you know, as you mentioned, we've got 160,000 members in 177 countries. And we know that all of the knowledge is not in any one of those countries. And we have got to all work together because these are global issues that we're facing. And we've got to share our knowledge and information and work together at solving it.
Yeah. Just to round us out, Tom, a couple of quick questions based back on the report card again. What would you say it would take to move America's infrastructure grade from a C to a B or even an A? I mean, is that a realistic ambition?
Well, I think so. That is certainly our goal. We would love to see it at an A. Fit for the future. I mean, that's what we're working towards.
Yeah.
But at a minimum, we want to get to the B level. And, that's where we talk about that. You saw the investment. We're talking about, pretty significant investment needs over the course of the next 10 years, $3.7 trillion. So it's a pretty significant price tag. That's not all the federal government. That's federal, state, local, and private sector. So it requires that. But it also, it requires, leadership. I mean, and I think it starts at the national level. And I think, if you set the tone and you set the culture and you let people know how we're prioritizing our infrastructure, this has got to be a number one concern so we don't focus on it when it disappears. And then focusing on resilience and making sure that, we're prepared for the future. And so, every time there is there will continue to be these extreme weather events and we'll have to respond to them. but we need to make sure we're carrying the message that we need to be better prepared for the next one.
So just rehearsing your 60-second pitch, because we've all seen West Wing. How much time you get to make these cases to politicians. If you had 60 seconds, with a skeptical lawmaker or disengaged voter, what's your best pitch then for why this report card matters and why investment today pays off for tomorrow?
Well, America's infrastructure, it's the foundation on which our national economy, our global competitiveness, our quality of life depends. We absolutely depend on it. And while it's often out of sight and out of mind, when there are deficiencies, we all feel the impact. And infrastructure is more than just roads and bridges. It's also the airports we use for travel, the schools our children attend, the parks we enjoy, the water we drink, the public transit we ride, the power that keeps our lights on, and so much more that impacts our daily lives. We don't have a choice. We absolutely have to invest in it for our quality of life and for life itself.
Tom, I agree. Where shall I send the money? Brilliant. Tom, thanks so much. Really, really interesting conversation. Fascinating report card. I think it's a fantastic initiative. Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts. Thanks for explaining the report card, and great to see you again.
Well, it's great to see you as well. I love getting together with our friends in the UK, our colleagues, and so I hope to be over there soon, and hope you'll be back over here soon, and hope we can get together face to face again.
Absolutely. Well, I'll take you up on that, and look me up when you're in the UK. So, sadly, though, it's all we've got time for on the podcast today, but there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information to share and all the latest podcasts to listen to, including last week's episode with Aruna Miller about the Baltimore bridge collapse, which we referenced earlier. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Tom. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.